Introducing myself. I'm Madeleine Doubek. I'm the Executive Director of Change Illinois, a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for ethical and efficient governments in Illinois. So today we are joined by, and we would like to thank our friends and partners at the League of Women Voters of Chicago and Illinois. Common Cause Illinois is an advocate and champion and supporter of this as well, but they couldn't be with us here today. We're also joined by and supported by the Chicago Urban League, the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, the Latino Policy Forum, Workers Center for Racial Justice, and the Metropolitan Planning Council, in addition to the speakers you'll hear from shortly. As aldermen start to discuss a new budget, we're calling on them to include funding for the people of the city to actively and meaningfully participate in redrawing their ward boundaries. And so now I'd like to call on Liliana Scales, Change Illinois' Advocacy Director, to talk more about why that's needed.
Good morning, everyone. Chicagoans have diminished political power when neighborhoods are carved up again and again to ensure the election of incumbents rather than to keep communities intact in their wards. How can Chicagoans hold their aldermen accountable when this happens? How can Chicagoans organize around an issue like advocating for more community services or for a road on their block to be resurfaced when their neighborhood is represented by 4 different aldermen? And in some neighborhoods, it's as many as 7. Addressing concerns that Chicagoans have can be easily hard for people who live in neighborhoods that have been split up into multiple wards, like Englewood, Logan Square, Back of the Yards, Little Village, Austin, Lakeview, Avondale, Uptown, and Chinatown. The ward remapping process historically has been done in a way that puts the interests of incumbent aldermen first, rather than the people of Chicago. And wards have been drawn in a back room in a closed process controlled by people like Alderman Ed Burke, who continues to serve as alderman while under federal indictment on corruption charges. How the ward remapping process has been done must change now. Consider the current map. Does it make sense? Does it allow for Chicagoans to easily understand who is supposed to be representing them? Does it allow for Chicagoans to more easily unite, organize, and put pressure on their aldermen when they want something addressed? No, it doesn't. And that's why the process needs to change and needs to engage Chicagoans. We have been asking Chicagoans what they want in a community survey we've been conducting as part of my involvement in the Chicago United for Equity Fellowship. And they want more of a say in how their wards are drawn. More than 200 Chicagoans so far have told us that Chicago's remapping process must include community input. And Chicagoans deserve that transparency, and the city should set aside funds in the budget to ensure meaningful community engagement in that process.
So as Lily said, in the past, Chicago ward boundaries have been drawn through a process led by aldermen like Dick Mell and Alderman Ed Burke, who, as we all know, is currently under indictment. We're here today to say that no matter who leads the ward remap conversations in the council next, the backroom deal-making that excludes Chicago residents has to stop. The process should center Chicago residents and include multiple opportunities for them to participate, and the people in power should respond meaningfully to that input. In addition to the community survey Lily mentioned, a scientific statewide survey Change Illinois commissioned earlier this year found that 81% of the people in Chicago want independent redistricting. That statewide poll also found strong support for independent redistricting among Latinos at a level of 73%, and African Americans at 67%, and white voters at 77%. In Chicago and at every level of government, we cannot have remapping processes that exclude constituents and that lack accountability and transparency. We're here to say no more to Ed Burke or anyone else going into a back room to cut ward remap deals. No more to aldermen choosing their voters. And so now Lily will introduce some of our speakers and partners to talk about what the past ward remaps have done to their neighborhoods and what they want to see for their wards in the city's future.
Thank you. We'll first hear from Andy Kang, Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago.
Morning, everybody. As Lily mentioned, my organization, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, our mission is to achieve racial equity through collective advocacy and organizing, which is why we're here today with all these fine folks. We have affiliates in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, LA, and San Francisco. And our experience around redistricting, I should just back up real quickly and for context, Asian Americans have been and continue to be the fastest growing group in Chicago. And we have a long history of immigrating to Chicago and helping create the vibrant community that we have here in the city. But unfortunately, in the last redistricting process in 2011, Machine Alderman Dick Mell, as well as at the time Mayor Rahm Emanuel, there was very little information provided to the public, to community members who wanted to participate in the redistricting process. We had perfunctory public meetings and hearings, and as Madeleine mentioned, a lot of backroom deals that many of us were not privy to. And so we believe it's time to really definitively close the book on those days by forging a new path that embraces transparency and real, true community participation. And so, whether we're talking about the neighborhoods in the Argyle corridor, which has a long history of embracing and welcoming Southeast Asian refugee community members, or the Korean community, which I hail from, also on the north side, the well-known community for the South Asians around Devon Avenue in Westridge, and of course, Chinatown in the greater Bridgeport area, which is a community that has been around for over 100 years, believe it or not. We all have issues that we would like to see get addressed, whether it's affordable housing, better schools, public safety, language access issues, but none of that will happen if we don't continue to move towards greater accountability by our city council and our city government. And that will only happen by making steps to make a redistricting process that really embraces more public participation. So finally, I'll just end, we're at a time in our nation where we're seeing our democratic process facing some of its greatest challenges and potentially greatest threats. I think it's critical for our city and for all Chicagoans to really lead the way by showing what transparency, showing what really valuing democracy looks like. And so our hope is that the city council and the mayor will hear us and our message today, and we look forward to continuing that conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Next, we'll hear from Rodney Johnson, president of One Health Englewood and a longtime resident of Englewood.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Rodney Johnson. I represent One Health Englewood. We reside in Englewood and West Englewood community. Our mission is to promote health and well-being through health literacy, health promotion, health advocacy, and research. So I'm here today to share a little bit about my experience that I've had with actually the ward remapping. As a longtime resident, when I moved back to the community in early 2000s, I was voting in the same place. But I noticed, and I didn't pay attention to it, but by the election of 2014, when I went to actually vote again, I noticed that the place where I was voting had changed. And I was wondering why it had changed. So I actually started to do research, and I found out there was actually 5 wards. It's actually 6 wards at the time in West Englewood and Englewood. And it's something that we as residents, we actually took for granted at the time. But the more I started to look at it, I could see actually how it was associated with certain issues that were happening in our community. For example, we have one police district that actually covers all of Englewood and West Englewood, and we have 6 different wards. So you can see that there are more, the attention becomes more on what's happening with crime than actually political representation. And so I actually live right on the edge in the 17th ward, and right across the street from my house is actually the 6th ward. So if you ask people what ward they actually live in or who's their alderman, there's actually a lot of people don't realize who their alderman actually is, not unless they're more involved in the community. I think when you look at the resources that come in and actually representation, you have most of the people who actually live in the 6 wards in actually any ward in West Englewood and West Englewood. The majority of the ward, except for the 16th ward, resides outside the community. That means you have people from outside of the community making decisions of what happens inside of the community. So it's almost like a disenfranchisement by design, which the community is already suffering hard enough. When you look at the fact that the aldermen have to take into account other communities, and one prime example is the 15th ward, where you could actually, it's one's part of West Englewood, and it goes all the way down to I can't remember it now, but it's a little further north, right next to Archer, and I'll get, I apologize, I gotta remember. My point is, it's Gage Park, West Town, and it's one more, right? But anyway, my point is that you have people that actually have nothing in common with the residents, making decisions for the residents, and they're gonna have priorities for their own community. So by Englewood and West Englewood actually having much more representation, then the alderman can actually focus on what's happening in the community, and the community that's been that's historically underserved over time. So one of the things we're advocating for is to actually make people more aware so that they can make decisions ahead of time instead of seeing what happens afterwards. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rodney. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Dalara Sayeed, President of Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition.
Good morning, and thank you to our partners, Change Illinois, AAAJ, One Health Englewood, and other civic leaders for coming together, as you can see, Chicago's diverse and complex communities. And we want to address Chicago's ward redistricting process and outcomes. I'm a Chicago kid, and Chicago residents in 2020, our needs and our talents are more diverse, complex, and nuanced than ever before. So equity and inclusion in redrawing our ward is critical. Policies made for us must be made with us, and representation matters. Chicago City Council must have a transparent remap process of identifying our city's wards. Often, who's hurt are the most invisible or marginalized communities, and Chicago is hurt. So wards have to be drawn not for the benefit of office holders or those who already hold power and influence, but for the benefit of all Chicagoans. So I and others like me who identify as Chicago Muslims are some of the most diverse residents in the city. Mayor Lightfoot, echoed by several of the aldermen, told me after spending a day with us, I knew Chicago Muslim community was diverse in every demographic and every way, but I think I just met someone from every country of the world or every demography of the world. And that's true. So I'll share why inclusion is critical in this ward remapping process for communities like ours, so that our leaders see us and they know us, right? Chicago Muslims sit right now at the intersection of race, ethnicity, class, faith, and background. About 30% of us are African American on the south and west sides, and some on the north. 30% are South Asian, 25% are Middle Eastern, and a growing community is Latino and African immigrant. Families that have Muslims are also likely to have members of other faiths as well, Christians, Jews, Hindus, or even agnostic. We have some of our Illinois' highest net worth families within Chicagoland's Muslim community, but we also have 30% of Muslims who identify as low income. We have been deeply impacted by COVID as patients, but we've also made impact on COVID as first responders. So please visit illinoismuslims.org to learn more about us. I just gave you a very complex and diverse community, and yet in the third largest city in this nation, with some of the largest communities of all diverse backgrounds, Chicago City Council has 0 Asians, 0 South Asians, 0 Arabs, 0 Muslims, 0 Hindus, 0 Buddhists. Should I keep going? Or you get the message? We're all here today to say we are at our city's service. We've always been. During the census, this coalition right here came together and we reached 100,000 or more Chicago households. We made hundreds of thousands of phone calls together, and we assisted in thousands of census completions. Why? Because we want to be counted, we want to be represented, we want to be seen, we want to be heard. We're also conducting at the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition a report with UIC and ISPU on who are Chicagoland's Muslims and Illinois Muslims, so that we ourselves can understand the diversity of different communities. All of us have much work to do in the year ahead, and we have to ensure that Chicago's wards are drawn to benefit our whole city, all Chicagoans who live, work, play, and pray in our city's neighborhoods. So thank you again. Let's do this.
Thank you, Dilara. And then our last speaker is Monse Ayala. She's a community organizer for Increase the Peace.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a lifelong resident of Gage Park from the South Side, and I've pretty much been canvassing for about 6 to 7 years now in my neighborhood, whether I'm sharing community resources like basketball programs or encouraging folks to register and vote. I hear the same phrases over and over again all the time. I don't know what ward I live in. I don't know who represents me. I don't even know what that process looks like. Or I don't even know aldermen do that. And that same level of frustration and state of confusion is not unique when we have a rigged system that just doesn't work for everyday people like you and me. When neighbors are trying to fix something as simple as a broken street light, but can't seem to really get a straight answer from their leadership, that's a problem. When people are being turned 4 different directions because they have 4 different aldermen for one neighborhood, that's a problem. When simple processes like organizing, block parties, and of course I'm talking pre-COVID, or fixing potholes, but they're not at the reach of, common folks like them, that's a problem. And we see it all the time. We're seeing it in neighborhoods like back of the yard where we have 5 different aldermen for one community. That's a problem. How do we expect cohesion when people are scrambling left and right, not knowing who they can turn to? And this isn't unique. I think a lot of my peers have said it already, where this is happening across the city and all 77 neighborhoods of Chicago. And it's happened in my own backyard of Gage Park. How is it possible that we have an alderman who is still able to hold office despite being under federal investigation as we speak? And politicians are going to continue to abuse this rigged system that protects them and allows them to really do what they want, when they want, because they have set it up that way. And last time I checked, I thought these politicians are supposed to put community interest above their own self-interest. So these backdoor hidden processes are not working when we can't see this clear vision of accountability within our leadership. And I'm talking about our city council members. So when city council members allow gerrymandering, they're going to continue to weaponize these methods at the expense of Black and brown folks. And I'm tired of it. So I'm asking folks that haven't woken up to listen carefully, because if our community input didn't matter, if our voices didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying so hard to keep us out of these conversations. And that's why all of us are here today. We're demanding the end of these backdoor processes so that communities have a say on what their neighborhoods are going to look like for the next 10 years. And we can't really afford to wait. We can't afford to wait until next year, because then it's going to be too late. Thank you for your time, everyone. And I'm humbled to be here with everyone today.
Thanks, Monse, Rodney, Andy, Dalara. That was wonderful. Appreciate all of your perspectives and help today. So again, we are asking the mayor and the city council to set aside funds for active resident participation in ward remapping and to commit to a transparent process that includes community input the people of Chicago want. We have an incredible opportunity to change the culture in Chicago by fixing the remapping process that serves as the bedrock of our democracy. Chicago stands at a precipice right now as we seek to fix the systemic racism that has left people out and held our city back. Ward maps form the foundation of our elections and our government, and ending ward gerrymandering and giving residents their power and their voices is critical in this process. Chicagoans deserve better. Chicagoans want better. We want a map that puts the people first. Thank you. And now I will open it up to any questions. If you could use the raise your hand function, we'll try to do this in an orderly fashion. If any journalists with us today have some questions.
Great. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Justin, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry. So yeah, Justin Lawrence with Block Club Chicago. I'm wondering, and this is a question open to anybody. What does a community focus? What does that input process look like? Is it community meetings? Is it going out into these already gerrymandered wards, or hosting people through, I guess, Zoom? Maybe we'll see where we are. But what does that process look like, and what would be a sufficient, substantial community outreach process look like to satisfy what you guys are calling for?
Well, I'll go ahead and start and say that, I think that we need to ensure that every corner of the city knows about this process and has an opportunity to participate and engage. What that looks like can take any number of forms, and I guess it will probably be in some part informed by where we're at with the pandemic. But absolutely, there should be a series of public meetings, and everything that is done around ward remapping ought to be done in public. I don't know if Andy, you want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add that, and certainly I speak only for Advancing Justice and based off the last city redistricting process, but also what we've seen in independent redistricting processes, for example, in California, is last time around in 2011 and in early 2012, most of the key decisions were being made in private conversations away from the public, away from community members. And I just don't see a reason for that, right? Like, have that conversation among city council members out in the open, where the community members can hear the conversation, right? For me, when we talk about transparency, that's what we're talking about, is let's have those conversations out in the open so that people can understand how these decisions are coming about and also actively participate in them, right? So when we say backroom deal, I do want us to understand that that's not just a catchy cliche. That's exactly what happened last time and has been our city's history, is all these critical decisions that impact all our neighborhoods being made by a select number of people away from everybody else. And that's not democracy at its best. And so, as a principle, I'd say that would be one of the pillars that we would look for.
And if I could add, I think there's a set of inputs and then the outputs in a process like this. The inputs are where information is coming from. And we are here, we are at your service, and so are dozens of other organizations, plus all the residents of the city of Chicago. Recently, we've done a pretty good job of getting inputs through census work, through our 2021 budget ambassador and roundtables roles. I mean, doing that even better, even stronger within communities for this rewarding process would be really critical. The outputs, though, we've never really done well or transparently. And that leads to Madeleine and Andy's points of like, when we are making the key decisions for what the wards actually look like, make them as transparent, open, and available to everybody as much as the inputs can be. We don't want to just get everyone's input and then still go to the back rooms and then actually make the final decisions. We want the inputs and the outputs of this process to be very transparent and clear for all our residents. This is where Chicago will gain legitimacy, credibility, and stature to take a real position as a top city in this nation. And right now, you know, we're being bashed in all kinds of ways. Let's get some of these things right and be a model.
Yeah, and I would add that when you look at the map in certain areas, why is it so much like a jigsaw puzzle? I mean, I believe if it was more in the open, and then when people would actually say, okay, well, we're going to do this, they would have to explain more as to why that you have to go around this corner or have a ward that comes in and splits another ward. So people like live on one side of the ward, they got to go all the way around and cross a ward before they get to their other ward. Those kind of things, you could easily shift it over and make it more uniform. So give people a sense of neighborhood. It's almost as if they want people to be confused about their representation so they can continue to be disenfranchised. People need to know that they're going to be represented by someone as a whole, that this person lives in their area and they can see and help develop their area to make it look like they want a place where they want to live. Because if the aldermen would have to look at that way, they would have much more invested than they would to be able to live in a posh area. And then they say they have this one area that's connected to their community. They're never going to see change because their priorities are going to be stretched to the point where they can only give a certain amount of energy toward building up communities that have been disenfranchised for decades.
You know, this is
Any
Andy.
other questions? Sorry.
Sorry, Madeleine. You know, I just neglected to mention in my just one really notable example to Rodney's point is in the 25th Ward redistricting. Not only was Chinatown chopped up, but East Pilsen was intentionally cut out of then former Alderman Danny Solis's ward, specifically because his previous challenger, hailed from that area and had a strong level of support. And so to Rodney's point, it's the reason why the 25th Ward looks so strange. It kind of swoops up north to Presidential Towers and comes back down and cuts out East Pilsen. And that's the kind of shenanigans that I think nobody in the community is well served by. Perhaps Danny Solis was when he was the incumbent, but we want to see an end to those types of practices.
Any other questions from the media? All right, well, hearing none, thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate your time and your commitment to the cause, and we'll keep fighting for free